Hopefully you guys can see me and hear me. Yep, it looks like you can. Okay, I am so sorry. It's funny. There's certain things in life that just decide that they hate you. And YouTube live streams and OBS Studio are two of those things. No matter how much I prepare, something goes wrong when I try to do this. And I'm in the software industry. You would think that I should feel an extra degree of shame because of that. And I do. Trust me, I do. So, lesson for today, never update your software right before you're about to do something with it. Sometimes all the stuff you just did gets broken. So, hopefully, you guys are still here and we can talk a little bit about the things that have changed in 2025 or that are changing in 2025 from an SEO perspective. I'm going to try and keep this reasonably short, which I know is a difficult thing for me, as you all know. And I want to preface this with the fact that there are a bunch of different avenues that we can go down when it comes to this subject. And that means that once we get done, if there's anything specific that you guys want me to focus on more, please let me know. I'm happy to go into any detail on anything that we cover here. One of the things that I want to point out before I dive in, I always try to highlight stuff that's free. Tools and that kind of thing. If there's anything that's paid, I will let you know that it's paid before we dig deeper or try to give you some kind of a free alternative. The idea is that any of this stuff can be done by anyone and there's no need to make some kind of a crazy budget for it. The second thing is that I'm going to be covering this in a lot more detail tactically at the RIA Summit at the end of April. So if you're going to the RIA Summit at the end of April, awesome. I'll see you there, and that will be a follow-up to this live stream. And if you're not, it's in Atlanta, hosted by the RIA. There's lots of really good sessions and lots of great after hours hanging out and chilling with associates and stores, etc. So consider going if you're not. If you can't, decide not to, etc., we are going to have a recording of one of those sessions so that you can watch it here. Okay, enough of the admin stuff. I know I'm like 10 minutes late to this. The first thing that I want to talk about with SEO is the most common misconception in run specialty, particularly when it comes to what people who find you through Google searches are typically looking for and what it feels like they might be looking for. I've talked about this in a lot of my strategy conversations in the past. It's very easy when you're looking at an e-commerce store and a website as an administrator, meaning you guys in your seat trying to bring customers into those digital spaces, to think of it like the inside of your store. In other words, the visitor is inside and now it's your chance to show them around and give them a tour of the products. That's not how it works online. The biggest challenge online is actually getting them to find the front door of your store and the fact that you exist in the first place. And the differentiator between a run specialty retailer and brooksrunning.com or hoka.com is that you are local to that person or tend to be local to that person, and you bring something very special to the shopping experience, which is your expertise and hands-on interaction with that customer. It's no coincidence that most everyone's first time buyer in run specialty is somebody who sets foot in the store for a fitting and then purchases from there. We know from statistics that somewhere around 55% of those folks who come in and have a fitting and make a purchase from you in their very first visit leave extremely satisfied but never return. And The going theory around why that happens is more about the need that they are looking to satisfy when they need to be properly fit for a shoe versus the need that they're trying to satisfy when they're looking for a replacement for that shoe, couple months or 400 miles down the road. That theory is something that I've dug into in depth that I'm happy to talk about at any time, but it's not something that I'm going to hang on to for very long today. What all that means is that above all else, the two things that I want you to think about focusing on throughout the conversation today are, one, your brand and the things that your running store, intergalactic running, as we say in our demo, brings to the world that doesn't have anything to do with products. So your fitting process, your brewery runs every week, your really cool community that travels and does relay races all over your state, whatever it is, it's those things that define your brand much more than the products that underpin how that brand makes money. And so when we're thinking about brand over product, what I mean by that is that when you're thinking about creating content and attracting people to come to your website and consequently make a purchase from you, the most important things that you can highlight are brand related. It's very, very easy to be competitive for the top spot in any search when you're locally focused and brand specific. And it's very, very hard to compete for the top spot in a search when it is product/commodity specific. In other words, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to compete with Hoka when somebody searches for the Hoka Clifton 9, right? So somehow, in order to be the top spot, or probably even on the first page, when somebody searches for Clifton 9, you have to have more content that is relevant to the Hoka Clifton 9 and more ad spend in that specific region than Hoka themselves and all of the major big box companies combined. It's unlikely that that's the case. But when somebody talks about proper shoe fitting in Asheville, North Carolina, or best running shoes for Colorado Springs, Colorado in the springtime, or running store near me, those are all specifically focused, sort of je ne sais quoi, brand specific strengths that you can absolutely compete for top spot for very easily in your space. So when you're thinking about what attracts people to your site to begin with from an SEO perspective, brand is your superpower and product is really more of a logical next step after you satisfy the original question than it is the thing that you should use to attract new customers and more revenue. If you go product first, it is going to be exponentially more difficult to generate traffic and revenue online and to be seen online. Finally, everything we talk about and all of Run Specialty, generally speaking, is a local specific, local powerhouse kind of a focus. In other words, in Charlotte, North Carolina, a runner or a walker or somebody who's interested in anything that we might be able to focus on from a Run Specialty perspective is most likely going to do a local search. In other words, their search is going to have something to do with the locality, the physical and geographical locality. If they need to be fit for the very first time for a shoe, it's going to be specific to Charlotte, North Carolina. If they're looking for events, running events, training programs, that kind of thing that are relevant to them, it's going to be Charlotte, North Carolina. If they're located in Charlotte, North Carolina, insert your city here. It is very rare that somebody is going to be thinking of run specialty and not also be thinking of locality. And so everything we talk about is tinged with locality. And the underline here is brand first over product, locality as the focus, not concept. In other words, running shoe isn't what you want to talk about. The experience of being a runner in your local area and how your brand brings strength and expertise to that experience. That's what you're talking about. Okay, with the basics out of the way, a couple comments about how SEO is changing in 2025, how Google's algorithm is adjusting, what you can expect when it comes to future changes as well. So back in 2017, when I did the majority of my web development work as a web developer, there were things that you could do that were technical, that were kind of like tricks/hacks for SEO that in retrospect were far easier than the stuff that it takes to do today. Things like meta keywords and, alt image tags and other things on any given page that you could adjust, or as long as you mention the keyword a certain number of times with enough space between mentions of that keyword, and it's bolded one time, then you could hack the SEO algorithm. I mean, I remember we created, and I was in mainframe modernization at the time, which was a lot of fun. We created pages where, it would essentially be the same content with different keywords as the focus, different, programming languages that we focused on as the focus. And that contributed to our SEO success. In 2025, none of what I just said matters all that much, and oftentimes can hurt you if you do. For example, if I had carbon copies of 10 different pages and simply changed the keywords that I wanted to focus on between those 10 different pages and tried to gain the SEO machine by having more copies of the same content with the keyword focus like that, I would be flagged as trying to game the machine and actually get dinged from an SEO perspective by Google and the AI companies, because I'm trying to be, shady. So there are definitely things that in the past were tricks that are now things that you get punished for. Replica content is definitely one of them. So if you are an old head like myself and you're thinking about SEO from a meta tags, meta keyword, meta description, on page technical adjustment perspective, I challenge you to think differently about it in 2025 and going forward. I try in my research and in the way that we implement things at Run Free Project, and all of our classes, to make things as free and future-proof as possible. And future-proofing from the perspective of 2025 is an interesting endeavor. All of those technical things, and the reason that worked was because Google, and I'm using Google as the example, of course, because Google currently owns the market on search. Probably not for long, but that's a topic that I'll cover here in the next few minutes as well. But in 2017, Google had a limited number of tools that it could use to determine any given URL's fitness as a result for somebody's search. And in other words, it can't think, or it couldn't think like a human, and it couldn't read content and determine relevance from reading the content. It was using the same tricks that we would exploit to determine whether it was worth putting you at the top of the search results or not. Well, now we have AI, and everything has changed. Now, AI can't think, even though it seems like it can think. but it's very, very good at correlating information into the closest thing to a thought that a computer's ever had in history. And it can look at relevance to the search result, to previous searches where your URL has appeared, and so on. And it will. And it will continue to do so more accurately into the future. So when you think about how can I maximize my search engine optimization while also future-proofing the work that I'm doing, because let's be honest, this is a pain in the ass. SEO feels like black magic, and it's not easy. There's not a button that you can press to magically make it happen, right? But broadly speaking, philosophically, what can you do to future-proof your search engine optimization? And the answer is to create relevant content, legitimate content that would satisfy a person's question that they would ask a search engine. And the higher the quality of the content that you create is, the more relevant what you write or produce is to the searcher's original intent when they were searching, the better you're going to do in searches, no matter where those searches come from and no matter what the year is. So the quality and relevance of your content is the most important thing. In other words, if you were to ask, should I focus on the technical perfection of all my little adjustments on every page that some tool that runs an SEO scan of my website has told me to focus on? Or should I focus on writing a whole bunch of content that's relevant to the things I'm awesome at and that I think my customers would be interested in searching for and finding real answers to? Which one of those should I focus on if I could only focus on one? It's absolutely the latter and not the former. The quality and relevance of your content is far, far, far more important than the technical details. I always use the analogy, if I am a runner on and off. I'm very injury prone. As a nerd, I think that might be required. And I'm very slow. I don't think that's ever going to change. But, if I was watching an Instagram reel and I saw David Goggins running along, jacked with his shirt off, this is, mile 63 of his 100-mile jog this afternoon, and I happen to glance down and see that he's wearing a pair of Alpha Flies, and I were to say to myself, all I need is a pair of Alpha Flies, and I can run 100 miles tomorrow afternoon, and it'll be cool. And I come into your store and repeat that thought to you. You're going to try as hard as you can not to laugh at me. And then you're going to say, listen, the thing is, to run 100 miles in a day, which I know that's not possible. This is an analogy. Stay with me, please. To run 100 miles in a day, you have to train to be able to do that. Distance and speed are both things that must be trained over time. There's no shortcut, and that's just how it works. However, if you train and you go out there after training and try to run 100 miles in a pair of high heels, or you try to run the 100 miles in a pair of Alpha Flies, you're going to have a much better experience in the Alpha Flies. So even though the Alpha Flies matter, they don't matter in the way that I thought they would matter. And that is technical SEO versus the quality of content in a nutshell. In other words, the hard part where you're generating valuable information for your reader that will help them be informed about something, make a decision about something, possibly a buying signal, whatever it is far, far, far more relevant to improving the user's experience and optimizing your place in search engine results than the technical stuff. Even though the technicals, once you've mastered this part and doing the technical stuff versus not doing it is going to give you a better result. But it's far in the distance as far as priority is concerned when those two things are sitting side by side. Finally, before we dig into some of the additional details, and I know this is a little bit of an unusual format, but I thought I would just come here and just talk like we're two people hanging out before I start showing slide stuff, just because a lot of this is philosophical and a little bit less prescriptive than some of the things that we've covered in the past. There is a deep and continuous misconception about search engine optimization and e-commerce, particularly in run specialty, that I hope to one day quell. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But, Run Free Project is an e-commerce platform for run specialty retailers. We have hundreds of the country's top run specialty stores operating on our platform. We've been doing this a long time. As our customer, it is in our best interest to arm you with everything we possibly can for you to make as much money as possible and get as much traffic as possible to your store. And so in doing both of those things and running towards those incentives, we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't. And we also hear a lot of opinions on a pretty regular basis. And one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, should I go in and add keywords to the meta keywords area and, a specifically tailor-made branded meta description on the SEO fields at the bottom of each one of my product listings? Will that help? Probably not. It is much more time consuming than it is advantageous in any way, shape, or form. Because you're not, at the end of the day, you're not going to be competing against other running stores for the Ghost 16 or what, name a shoe, right? If you're going online and trying to compete with product, it is going to be a very expensive time, and it's going to feel like you're squeezing juice from a very, very dry lemon. In reality, running stores, and again, I'm speaking in broad generalizations because, that's the only way to have this conversation. Your specific situation may be slightly different, but I doubt that it is. But in general, running stores aren't competing with each other or the manufacturer to get the sale from the person who Googles Clifton 9. It's not happening. That's not how people engage with run specialty online. It just isn't. You may be the exception because you have a specific exposure from a brand or community perspective that makes product more relevant to the value that you bring to folks. But generally speaking, focusing on product isn't going to help you. That's the very confusing and sad reality. Focusing on the experience that somebody has when they walk through your front door in your shop and or engage in your community in a way that makes them a member of your community who always returns. Those subjects are the things that set Run Specialty apart. Somebody who's searching for Clifton 9 and they're looking to make an online purchase is going to go to Hoka and do a D2C. You may get lucky and get a couple pure product purchases, but if you're trying to compete with the manufacturer always wins. And so when you're thinking about what you should focus on, think about starting with your brand strengths and ending with a product recommendation. Think about it just like in store. If I were to walk into your running store right this second, you would not walk up to me and push a wall of shoes directly into my face and say nothing. And say, pick whichever shoe is the one you want. It's not how that interaction ever goes. You or one of your people would come to me and say, hey, I'm Andre, and we're a running store. Tell me a little bit about what you got going on, and I can point you in the right direction. And then, I give you my life story. I'm one of those customers, I'm sure you could imagine. I give you my life story, talk about the injuries that I've had in the past, plantar fasciitis, this, that, and the other. And then we start into a fit process. And you or your representative, the whole time we're talking and the whole time I go and do a gait analysis or stand on the Star Trek transporter ring to see, where my contact points are and what my arch looks like and so on. You're thinking based on the information you're gathering from our interaction about what products you want to suggest at the end of that interaction. You're going to walk out with 3 or 4 shoes that are your curated suggestions, tailored specifically from your expertise and our interaction to me. And very likely, I had never heard of these, or I certainly don't know the technical advantages and disadvantages based on my needs. That's why I'm there to talk to you. And we want to repeat that process online because that is what makes you so special. Okay, so enough of laying the groundwork. A couple notes on the search engines, how people are searching, and some of the challenges that you are facing now that you weren't facing recently. And then we'll get into some tactics that you can take advantage of. So you may or may not know this, but Google as a search engine is kind of starting to fade. Yes, it still owns the market share. Most of us still use the term, go Google this, right? But many users, a growing number of users, are using their favorite AI tools to search for the things that they want. And even Google is using an AI-powered suggestion in its standard search to try and answer the searcher's question prior to ever offering it any results that might point to you. If you don't have any ad blockers on your machine and you go in and Google some term and clear your cache in your browser, etc., Google some term, the first thing it's going to do is give you an AI suggestion that may not be completely insane and wrong. The second thing it's going to do is give you ads. The third thing it's going to give you is a map with local listings that are very likely ads first and then legitimate next. And then after that, it's going to give you your Google results that we all sort of think of when we think of using Google. And that's at least halfway down the page. So as we know, when you do a Google search, you probably don't make it halfway down the page. For local businesses, like all of us, right? We are specific to our geographies. Sorry, I shake a lot when I do this. Let me sit back a little bit. Maybe I won't shake the camera so much. For local search, for geographically focused stuff, right now, Google isn't offering AI recommendations. But in their beta testing of all these AI tools, that beta test included AI-based recommendations, much like the AI recommendations from the pure search engine, for local search as well, meaning running store near me, something like that, where the map pops up and you've got your Google business profile and all that stuff. In the beta test, about a year and a half ago, it included local listings. So we can expect that Google is going to be injecting AI all over the place, up to and including in local listings. So when we think about how do we future-proof ourselves and focus on SEO that's going to work in 2025, we need to think about the fact that AI is going to be a really big part of search, generally speaking, but also it's going to be creeping in areas that were strongholds for a lot of the traditional amplification activities that we've done in the past. The AI component is a huge opportunity. It's still sort of taking shape. In other words, what does it mean to ask ChatGPT for recommendations versus Googling? Um, Everything's evolving so quickly in the AI space that the only thing that we really know is that AI, like ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, and the others, um, those are very likely going to take the place of Google in the medium and long term. And the way that they provide results is something that we'll have to study more as it evolves to make sure that we can continue to be relevant in that space. The nice thing about the strategy that I always talk about and the philosophy and tactics that we're going to discuss, both today and at the RIA Summit, is that these are content rich, quality over quantity focused activities that are trying to provide and inform and be a reflection of your store's strengths, personality, capabilities, etc., that are beyond product, which means that if the search engine changes, ultimately their goal, whether it's ChatGPT or Google, their goal is to provide results that are the most relevant for any given user who asks the question to begin with. In other words, I'm a successful AI vendor if when somebody asks me about, preparing for a couch to 5K in I don't know, Edisto Island, that I consider all of that information in the ask and give them something local and give them something that is compelling and unique as an answer. And the better that the AI engines get, the more compelling and the more relevant the answers they're going to provide will be. Therefore, if you are also focusing on those things as strengths, compelling, answering questions, unique, quality content and information, then as they improve, your SEO standings will also improve. And that's something to really think about. So I know I've gone over quite a bit here in my blatherings. I do want to talk about some tangible things that we can focus on when it comes to SEO optimization today versus in the past, with the lens of all the stuff that I just got done rambling about. So let's hope this software works. Let's see what happens. Wow, that's unusual. Okay, so one of the very important and growing areas of search engine optimization in 2025 is brand search volume. And I'm going to use Google as an example because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of trying to name all the AI engines right now, but it's the same for any search of anything. With Google, the more your brand is discussed online, the higher the likelihood is that you're going to be considered for the top spot in any given search result. So, when we're thinking tactically about how do we make that happen, one of the things that is kind of a hack that I've found is very effective, especially given the hyper-local focus of the things that we do from an SEO, we run specialty retailers, do from an SEO perspective, is, and this is going to be very weird, job postings. So if, no matter what job you need, the way job postings work, generally speaking, is when they see your listing, they Google your brand. In other words, if I'm, going to get a new job at a factory and I'm looking for a specific set of skills that they're looking for, I'm going to go Google the business before I do anything with that job posting. And oftentimes anything associated with these job boards and so on end up with brand specific searches happening when people visit. So what I mean is that we're trying to increase your brand search volume. One of the fastest ways to hack that increase is when you have a job, whether it's for a floor rep or a break dancer, that you post it everywhere. Remember, we want to focus locally. So post it on job boards all over the local area, because that's going to increase searches in your area of you, meaning you're going to be the result of any given search. Google takes account of how many times you show up for various searches. And then you can do it more broadly. So this is a list of job boards that are free to list your job listings on, your open job listings. And they are not necessarily local. Some of them are. But these are places that get an incredible amount of traffic and are very likely to create brand search volume for you. Again, this is kind of a hack. What I mean by brand search is, if you're Red Coyote running and you post a job listing, what we want is for people to then go to Google and search for Red Coyote running, right? That is a brand search. Or a snail's pace, Charlotte Running Company, the name of your store. That's what, when people search for that, Google says, okay, well, this is a brand that is in very high demand. It's kind of like the modern version of backlinks. Back in the day, Google would say, well, if a bunch of other websites are pointing to this website, then they must be an authority on whatever subject is being searched. That still happens, but this brand search volume metric is a newer way that they're focusing on determining whether you're an authority in any given set of searches. So, job postings, and again, I know it sounds crazy, but we're trying to generate brand search volume. Another way to generate brand search volume is what I call roundup lists and being featured in various ways. In other words, the best stores for the best local stores with a great and interesting history, or the best running stores for people with eyeball injuries. I don't know, I'm making stuff up, but you know what I mean. The top 10 North Carolina places you'd better visit before you die, etc., etc. That's a roundup list, and those are generators of brand searches as well. And again, that's our goal here, is to create brand searches. You can also pitch yourself. There are lots of people who are putting together roundup lists and or writing blog posts about stuff locally. And I have, down at the bottom there, I have local focus equals better results. If you're being featured in local online content from local media or bloggers, influencers, etc., being featured in those articles is going to create local brand search volume, which is going to be a multiplier for Google to say, hey, I can trust, Tortoise and Hare, because I see them appearing on, specifically on searches around certain subjects. And if there aren't options for being part of a roundup list or whatever else, you can also create your own roundup list using social media, using your own website. Reddit, for example, there's all kinds of different focused communities where a roundup list might be a really interesting thing to add to the conversation. Specifically, local focus. R/Charlotte. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's why I keep saying Charlotte. R/Charlotte is a Charlotte focused subreddit where, if I had a compelling reason to create a roundup list where my running store would appear, that's probably something that I should take the time to do, because people are going to then go to Google and be like, Rob's running company in Charlotte, what's this all about? Because they go through those roundup lists. Okay, you get it. The next one is, whether you love it or hate it, TikTok is a big deal. Short form content requires a lot less prep and fewer edits than long form content, so it's easier to make. And if you focus on your local area, the platform is going to target your customers for you. So, if you do a TikTok about, the fitting process at your store and have, show it in a quick short video, or if you do a TikTok about, being at a race that you guys put on, or, you or one of your employees is out on a run and it's particularly hot or cold or rainy or whatever else, and that's relevant to people who live in the area. Maybe you're in Seattle or London, and places where it rains all the time. And so, making jokes or focusing on the rain and the locality, and mentioning your running store or whatever it is that you want to pull interest towards, that's going to be very helpful. Again, someone in the local area who's into running, or who just moved there, or whatever it is, wants to race, whatever, they're going to see that content and they're going to go, oh, what's Reno Running Company all about? And then they're going to go search for that in Google by name, and that's going to be brand search volume. It's also good for, amplifying your brand, generally speaking, but I'm focused on brand search volume here because it's an interesting and new, clear focus of SEO results, being a part of the top of SEO results in 2025. You should also start a YouTube channel. If there's one thing that AI will never replace, it is personalized branded content, both long form and short form. But longer form videos on YouTube are growing in popularity very quickly. And it's a place where you can show off your expertise and special sauce. Talking about training for a couch to 5K in the springtime with allergies, especially in the Southeast, or you get what I'm saying about injecting local focus. But YouTube videos about this stuff amplify your brand. Being active on YouTube brings its own set of advantages from an exposure perspective on that platform. But it also translates very directly into brand search volume. Both platforms are going to inspire Google searches, and that's that brand search volume. And full disclosure, if you want to go for an even shady strategy, I wouldn't suggest it, but this is a thing. And it's a thing that isn't punished right now. You can poke around the idea of search bots. I wouldn't advise this, but I'm trying to give tactical answers to questions, and might as well get a little controversial. I wouldn't go down this road unless you're tech savvy enough to understand the risks that are associated with delving into this realm. Again, this is a very kind of hack of search engines that's probably going to be sealed off at some point in time. But for local searches, it may be shady, but it may establish a great deal of brand specific search volume in an area where competing for brand search volume is much easier. The more local you get, the easier it is to be at the top of those Google search results. And above all else, that locality focus will always end up with better results than trying to compete with the entire universe. One of the quintillion reasons to focus on local and aspects of your store and your staff and your community that bring value to people rather than trying to compete on a product. The Adrenaline 26 or whatever is coming out next, 25. I guess it is named after the year, right? I completely spaced. Let's call it the Adrenaline 38. You're going to be competing with Brooks and every other running store on the planet, and Zappos and Dick's Sporting Goods, and ratings from every Tom, Dick, and Harry on the planet. Where if you say Charlotte, North Carolina, even if you wanted to do a product focus in Charlotte, North Carolina, everything changes, and competing for top spot in a small area rather than the entire globe, much easier. And of course, we do want to ultimately save you time because we know you have a store to run, and SEO is boring. So the next thing to think about that is growing on the list of influencing factors that didn't used to matter quite as much is traffic diversity. So this is a fancy way of saying getting traffic to your website from places that aren't Google. Assuming, again, we're talking about Google, but, it can be the AI engines, whatever else it is. So most of you have probably spoken to me one-on-one. At some point in time, I've probably done a demo for you. And I probably asked if you've ever heard of Yandex, because we've had this running joke inside of Run Free for 5 years since me and the other guys founded the company. And our CTO, Jeremy, included Yandex as a search engine you could plug in your credentials for that we could automatically send data to if you wanted us to. And I was like, what is Yandex? No one knows what Yandex is. And to this day, and now that's probably going to be over, so I'm going to lose my own bet, but to this day, no one I've ever asked if they've heard of Yandex or not has ever said yes. And so I contend that no one on the planet, no one in the United States knows anything about Yandex. That said, Yandex is a real thing. It is a Russian search engine, and it is not Google, but it's close enough to Google to consider some of the things that we learned from a really huge security breach that they had back in 2023. I think it's completely reasonable to assume that, some of the inner workings of Yandex, since it really is a model designed to be as Google-like as possible, but Russian focused, will be relevant to us. A couple really interesting things came up from the algorithm that was leaked. So they call these ranking factors, right? This is stuff that the search engine considers while it's trying to place you in the results of any given search. Ranking factor 1367, there we go, says that sites with healthy traffic from social networks are rewarded with higher rankings. Obvious that would be the case, I think. In other words, if you're super active on TikTok and from TikTok somebody is led to a Google search, or if they come from TikTok to your website directly, and that traffic exists between TikTok and your website, or Instagram or Facebook, you name it, social media, right? Then you get rewarded with higher rankings. Just like if you have a lot of brand specific searches that are in the search engine, you're going to get rewarded with higher rankings. I've stopped learning how to talk. Here we go. And interestingly enough, ranking number 250 says if too much of your traffic comes only from search engines, then it could hurt your rankings. So that's kind of weird, right? So what do you do with that? And let me give you an example of traffic diversity from a store that uses Run Free as their website and e-commerce store. So organic search is people who find the site by way of a Google search or a search from Grok or Claude or ChatGPT. Direct is the user just types the store's URL into their browser. Paid social means from advertisements on Instagram, Facebook, etc. Organic video means clicking on a link in the description of a video on YouTube primarily. Referral is a user clicking on a link from another website, like a local news website or a blog post that somebody unrelated to that store has created and cited that store's website on. That referral traffic is also directly related to the concept of backlinks and the multiplication of perceived authority that comes from a high number of backlinks. In other words, if other websites mention you a whole lot, then it's very likely that you are in fact somebody who should be taken seriously about a specific subject. So that's those referrals. Organic social means clicking on a link in a social media post that isn't an advertisement. And email, it's email. So like campaigns you guys send from MailChimp or Klaviyo, or if you're working with Upper Quadrant or Carnan or somebody like that. Most of this speaks for itself, but I wanted to give you an example of what diversity of traffic actually is, and I wanted to leave you with something to chew on here, and that is, if you can find local content. This is kind of connected to the roundups conversation. If you can find local content creators that do blogs or social media, whether it's a roundup list or whether it's just somebody who's really active at running in your area, that's somebody who's worth reaching out to, because if you give them a reason to link to you, then that's a referral link that is a diversification of traffic that's going to improve and be a multiplier for your search engine results. One of the things that's really effective, I haven't seen as much of it in Run Specialty, but I've certainly seen it a lot just generally, especially in the tech world, is guest blogging and offering to write a blog post or a story about surviving allergy season without sacrificing your training schedule in Charlotte, North Carolina, to the local paper or news source or blogger that talks about running and prep in Charlotte, North Carolina, whatever it is. You get the point. I'm not going to blather too much about it. That's helpful for them. Having an expert, because if you're a store owner or the manager at a store or the buyer or somebody who's involved with a running store, you're immediately going to be considered an expert in that subject, and so that's going to help them, and of course it helps give you and your brand exposure, and it'll give people a totally new way of finding your website and its content. So it kills a bunch of birds with the same stone to go and do guest content for various creators and to do what you can to diversify the traffic that's coming to your site. I can just put it in there twice, I guess, apparently. Cool. So the next subject that I wanted to cover for tactics, something that's changing as a focus and is a multiplier for that perks Google up to say, oh, okay, well, these folks are worth listing higher in my results because the metrics around this are really high, is goal completion. So it was, funny enough, it was debated for years whether Google uses engagement metrics in its algorithm. I always sort of assumed that they would, but never really knew exactly how that was done. And the debate came to a close when Google was forced to reveal something called Nav Boost, which is an algorithm that they use as part of their search result determination engine during their Department of Justice antitrust trial recently. So Nav Boost rates content based on user engagement to a pretty deep degree, and its engagement is different with website content than it is with, say, a YouTube video, and it's a little bit more straightforward with a YouTube video. If somebody watches your YouTube video from start to finish, that is the maximum amount of engagement that you can achieve from that user. Very easy. If somebody goes to your an article that you've written on your website and sits there for 2.5 hours, that's not deep engagement, because people go to websites and sit on a page forever just because they lose interest or go do something else, or get up to go find the dog who just jumped over the fence chasing deer, whatever it is. I don't have any experience with that, of course. But how long you sit on the page is not an engagement metric for a search engine. What engagement means is whether a user likes your content or whether they read through it and they bounce because they didn't find what they need. If somebody likes your stuff, then they engage with it and you win. If they don't and they leave, then you lose. What does that mean, engage? Because I'm not clarifying. That means that their search stops with you, and the actions that they take after landing on whatever page you took them to with your content happen in a reasonably fast amount of time. And so your goal, if you think about it like a purchase, right? So your goal should be to end the user's search journey as quickly as possible and with you. So if somebody Googles best hydration system for trail running around Colorado Springs, and they find your locally focused blog post from your trail running guru at your shop, or locally focused product roundup page that person that works for you created, and we're assuming that you're a running store in Colorado Springs here, by the way, and then they buy a product from the page on your e-commerce site, that's goal completion. That's really what we want to focus on here. So what does that mean tactically? Well, obviously you have to create the content in order for somebody to complete the goal of their search with you. So, taking opinions and expertise and creating written content about those opinions and expertise. Us old people call it blog posts, but I know, blogs are not popular any longer. Everybody calls them articles now, but when it comes to search engines, written content connected to a URL is the most powerful reference tool that a search engine has. The more you write and have available on your URL that talks about what you're interested in, what you focus on, what your expertise is, the more data Google or ChatGPT or Grok or whoever it is that you're using has about you, which means that it can make better recommendations to go to you when somebody asks a question, which means that it's going to prefer you for those subjects. That's always going to be the case. But when it comes to goal completion, when you write these articles about, trail running in the suburb neighborhood trails of Charlotte, North Carolina, when you construct these things, you want to answer questions quickly So thinking of the question that was asked that led this person to your article to begin with, answering it up top. That means putting any calls to action up top as well, which is going to feel kind of weird because normally you would explain your expertise and opinion to somebody, and then at the bottom you would recommend the products, for example. Doing so at the top actually increases that goal completion metric, because the faster you're able to answer the question, the faster that you're able to generate a response that stays on your site and the goal is completed, the better Google sees it, right? So, if you're doing a table that compares a bunch of products, or if you're doing a table that compares a bunch of places to go run, whatever it is, or you're linking to products that you've suggested, put them at the top, do your content, and then put them at the bottom as well. It's going to improve goal completion metrics, which is now a bigger focus of search engines for multiplying your standings in search results. And of course, as a reminder, local focus is always going to give better results. When you're discussing whatever subject you want to discuss, tying your locality to it will improve everything that comes along in the end. The last thing to think about here with goal completion is that you can always begin the brainstorming around goal completion with the desired end result in mind. So, as an e-commerce platform, for example, my goal personally, and with my business, is to make sure that you sell as much online as possible so that I give you a great return on investment. Now, I know and you know that 97% of people who shop with you, whether it's online or in store, begin the buying journey on your website and your e-commerce store, and that 40 to 60% of the time that any given person, regardless of demographic, spends researching before they make a purchase, like buying running shoes, is spent on a website like yours and looking through the pages of e-commerce sites like yours before the purchase is made, even if that's in store. Those are both very valuable things that drive exposure, but may not necessarily directly drive dollar for dollar return on investment, right? So even though most of the people who come in the front door are starting with your website, sometimes it's hard to see that shows that your website is adding a whole lot of value. Or 40 to 60% of the research time happens, and if that happens on your website, and then their last step to complete that goal is to either buy from you online or buy from you in store, that is a direct value generated by that website and or e-com store. And so, if your goal is to sell product, then you can say, okay, how can I make this collection of products relevant to somebody interested in something that I have some interesting things to say about? Okay, well, maybe it's, insert your season here, winter trail running in and around Anchorage, surviving allergy season in Charlotte in the spring while training for a Couch to 5K. Whatever it is, you can give a lot of relevant information that you are an expert on, that they could only find from you and a handful of other individuals, but also listing products that you suggest after giving that opinion. The products is kind of the goal. Like, you want to help, obviously you do. You wouldn't be in Run Specialty if you didn't love helping people. But you do want to draw somebody to making a purchase, because that's how everybody feeds their family and sends their kids to college. So, thinking about the products you want to sell first, and then creating relevant content that shows off your brand and expertise. It's a good way to do this goal completion thing. So the last subject, the specific tactical subject that I'm going to cover today, is mastering the content game. And that is, like I mentioned before, and this is the part that everybody sighs when they see it, because there's no shortcut, or there didn't used to be any shortcuts, and it's less of a shortcut than I would like it to be, but nonetheless, is that you're providing Google or whatever search engine that people are using with as much information about the things that you're really, really good at having an opinion on or doing, or that your brand is super engaged with, etc. Not products. Products can be a byproduct of all these great things. Your fitting process, your community, the brewery runs, the naked relay. I don't know. I'm making things up. It'd be kind of crazy to have a naked relay. Let me know if you do that. I might have to come visit. But nonetheless, creating that content in written form, I shorthand call it blog posts, but now younger people call them articles because everybody wants to puke when they hear the word blog post. That is the goal here. You want to create that written content so that all the search engines know as much about you and the things that you bring to the table as possible. So, examples of, if I wanted to advertise products to people who aren't runners but who are interested in becoming runners, and I wanted to advertise the friendliness of my brand to people who have never run before but who are interested in it, and not just to people who run an 11-minute 5-second 2-mile, then I might write some articles that would have subject lines like this, Couch to 5K in Asheville, North Carolina, a beginner's guide. First time 5K training, how to choose the right gear for Asheville. Notice that I have that local focus. Surviving brutal climbs and descents while training for a 5K in Asheville. And I would have a picture of me, and I'd write this in a conversational editorial tone, and then I'd have some gear at the top and the bottom, or, a listing of places to start by going to train, whatever it is. This is where you're going to drive authority on the subject of running and run specialty and everything that comes with it in Asheville, in this example. In the past, we would have to sit down and write this stuff from scratch every time. Very, very difficult. And this content is becoming more and more relevant as a ranking factor than it ever was in the past, because now all these AI engines know how to interpret this stuff in a way that is similar enough to humans that the thing that astonishes us about using them is how human-like they are. Luckily, you can use AI to shortcut things, and I would suggest doing that as much as possible. Obviously, you want to bring your je ne sais quoi to the front every time, right? And sometimes AI is not going to be able to do that. AI is not going to be able to generate the concepts, thoughts, and opinions that only you have that are so valuable. But AI can certainly take all that valuable information and package it, brainstorm it, give you suggestions, and so on. So what you do is, once you determine kind of the main subject matter that you want to focus on and capture traffic for, you go to ChatGPT or your favorite AI tool and say, give me 30 semantically relevant but unique topics under the main category of Couch to 5K training in Asheville, North Carolina. Then give me 10 different keyword variations of these subtopics that each address a different search intent. And it's going to spit out a ton of what we would traditionally call keywords, but phrases and concepts that you can focus articles that you write about Couch to 5K training in Asheville, North Carolina on. So in the past, when we've had these conversations, when we talk about using AI, I've talked about generating an article the easy way using AI, which I'll restate here in a second because it's so freaking effective that I want you to at least have that in your back pocket as well. Now we have one level up. One of the hardest parts about figuring out what to write about is dissecting that into interesting individual concepts. Well, now with if you literally copy and paste this prompt and insert whatever the high level subject is that you want to focus on, you can have essentially 300 different keywords that you could write articles about all day long. So now figuring out what the keywords that are relevant are becomes a whole lot easier having this in your back pocket as well. So the tip that I always give folks when it comes to creating blog posts, which again, I'm going to work on turning, being a little bit more with the times and calling them articles. But at the end of the day, it's written content on your website. Got to have it, got to create it on a pretty regular cadence, and it's got to be relevant to what you do. That's what the deal is. So in the past, what I've said is, figure out a set of keywords that describes all the great things about you in your store and the experience that somebody has walking in the front door for the first time, engaging with your community, being a part of your events, races, other stuff, and then write articles about that stuff. When you sit down to write the article, it actually is really hard to focus so deeply on one specific subject and make it relevant to somebody who doesn't know anything about it. However, you can take ChatGPT and a few of the others. You can record yourself talking about that subject in the car on your way to the shop or whatever it is. Record yourself for 30 seconds to a minute, whatever, injecting all of your personal knowledge and experience on that subject into that recording. And then you can take the transcript from the recording or the recording itself, depending on the AI tool that you're using, drop it into the AI and say, please generate a medium length blog post that is focused on, and take one of the keywords / key phrases generated in this prompt as your kind of subject line, and create a blog post that is search engine optimized for all the list of things that make us great. And ChatGPT is going to spit out a blog post inspired by the content of your recording and all the other things you've given it, and you can literally copy and paste it, and that's your blog post. Bada bing, bada boom. Beautiful, right? So now we have a way to use AI to get a bunch of keywords on a subject so that you have lots and lots of ways to generate that content. And we have a way of actually writing the blog posts that isn't, tearing your fingernails out with a pair of pliers level torture using AI. And AI is a super interesting and cool thing. If you haven't played around with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Grok or one of those guys, I would highly suggest going and checking it out. Most of those platforms have free tiers, and it's life-changing and really, really, really impressive what these tools are capable of doing. Apparently, Google released Gemini 2.5 Pro Advanced day before yesterday, and it's been getting benchmark scores that are far beyond that of ChatGPT and Grok 3, which is the Twitter / X AI tool that's been getting really high scores. It's blowing those out of the water. So maybe Gemini 2.5 Advanced Pro or whatever it's called, I can't recall exactly, is the place the one you try out. But nonetheless, a quick YouTube search of how to create really effective prompts for AI and within 30 minutes you're an AI expert, and it makes such a great sidekick, and it's so good for creating relevant content for stuff like this. Now, I know I've taken us long, and I am so sorry for being late today. I also know that I have a tendency to use 1,000 words when 10 will do. So you can always rewatch this at 2x speed if you want to, but I guess I should have said that in the beginning, right? But ultimately, what I want to leave you with is, one, SEO is changing, and it's going to always change, and it will always change to maximize the relevance of what it gives as a result to the user, to the original intent of the user's question. So if you are careful and honest about the content that you create, and you inject the unique expertise that you bring to that subject into that content, then your search engine optimization strategy will improve on its own over time naturally. The better that the tools get at determining relevance to a specific subject matter, the more they're going to suggest you as the answer to the question that the user has. Very cool. Second, and probably most difficult thing to get your head around as somebody who's never thought about this stuff before, is trying as hard as you can to kill the idea that you're picturing the user as somebody standing in your store looking at products. That they may be, I'm using broad generalizations again, but brand first, product as a byproduct of the interaction with the brand, always gives better results in time. The top sellers on the Run Free Project platform are all brands who begin with brand and follow up with product as the final step of the engagement. So try as hard as you can to stop the nagging sensation that you need to be SEO optimizing for every single product in your e-commerce store, and that you're competing with Brooks and all your neighboring run specialty retailers and the big box stores to get somebody to click on the Ghost 2000 to make that purchase. That's not the reality that you live in. The real reality that you live in is that the people who buy from you are the people who know and have experienced the expertise, community, and beauty and value that your brand brings to the world that has nothing to do with products. The fitting process, your pint night runs, the races that you put on, the people that work for and with you, things that you've done in the community, your opinions about anything and everything related to running. Amplifying those things online should be your number one focus, and giving the user an accurate picture of what they can expect to see from a product perspective when they walk in the store, in the physical store, as well as leading them to suggested products when you provide all that expertise. That's the goal. Start with the secret sauce that nobody else can give, locally focused, end with product suggestions, and make sure that your e-commerce store is as accurate as possible and is as easy to use as possible, because the people who do end up making regular purchases from you on average are people who are return shoppers, lifelong shoppers, huge fans of your brand. If you have a very rare shoe on mega sale and you're one of 5 stores in the country who has that, then you're going to show up in search results that are specific for product. And you'll see people coming out of left field that you've never talked to before buying that product. But that's because you can compete in that case because nobody else is selling that product at that time or for that price point. Those are all compelling things. But if you're trying to bring people in for a new shoe that just came out that every other run specialty retailer, big box store, and Zappos and that kind of stuff that they're all offering, the likelihood that you're going to come up at the top of those results and bring somebody in versus one of those big dogs or the manufacturer themselves is very low. So don't waste your time trying to pump product terms. Waste your time trying to pump brand terms. Anyway, final thought, RIA Summit, end of April. I think it's April 28th in ATL. I'll be there. We're going to be talking more about SEO. I'll take the feedback that you give me from this video and others that I've done, and we'll expand on that stuff a little bit more. And I would love to bring you some more relevant tactical stuff that you can focus on to make the most of your online presence. My name's Rob. I am with the Run Free Project. We are an e-commerce and website and mobile app company that is specifically designed for run specialty retail. If you've never heard of us, click the link below to check out our site. Set up a quick tour of the platform with Luke, myself, and or others. And of course, if you're a run specialty retailer that doesn't use Run Free, we would love to have you as part of the project. We are the #1 e-commerce platform for run specialty, providing e-commerce for most of the industry, and we want to stay that way. And we aim to earn and keep your business. Okay, enough of the crappy commercial. Thank you so much for coming and enduring that pain today. Hopefully I gave you some information that's useful, and feel free to reach out anytime. hello@runfreeproject.com, and happy to help however I can. Cheers, everybody.